Welcome everybody to Insight class, where First Presbyterian's identity, faith, and values meets today's world. Today is April 11th, 2021, and we are doing this on Zoom, and we'll also are recording it, and we'll put it on the church YouTube site this afternoon. We are just starting a new series on social changes and how those changes in society are reflected in institutions. And there's hardly a more important institution than K-12 education. And we have the perfect person to talk to us about that today. Noreen Bush is the superintendent of the Cedar Rapids Community Schools. She has deep roots in the Cedar Rapids schools, and that's no exaggeration. She is a Jefferson grad. She went to UNI and is also still going to Drake to finish up her doctoral degree. She was appointed the superintendent of the Cedar Rapids schools in 2019 after many other positions that she's had in local schools. Super pleased to have you, Noreen, and really appreciate your coming and talking with us today. And look forward to what you have to present. We have a kind of a hard stop at about 5 minutes to 10. So it goes as long as it goes, but that's kind of that's the longest it can go because we need to go get coffee and then attend the stream church service at 10.
Coffee is really important, but so is church. So I hope that, well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me this morning, and lovely to see all of you on the screen. I do think the clouds might part today and we will see the sunshine this afternoon according to the forecast. But it is my pleasure to talk to you today, certainly about the current state of education, the future of education. And I'm really just going to bring it into context for Cedar Rapids Community School District. I think many of you, of course, have probably some roots also in Cedar Rapids Community School District. But I would say, even though I may be speaking to the context of our district, much of what the themes are apply to many of our school districts throughout our great community and our state and even our nation and the world, especially this past year. So I am going to share a slide deck with you, and I will welcome questions throughout. I'm not sure if you're usually versed in using the chat room, but I would welcome feedback or questions during the presentation. And also we'll try and make sure that I save some room at the end for maybe further discussion or questions. So here we go. I'll share my screen. Right. And if you could just give me a nonverbal thumbs up if you see that okay. Woohoo. All right, here we go. Good morning. So future of education within the context of Cedar Rapids. So in order to set up the future, I'm going to go a little bit to the past and the current state of where we've been for about 4 years now in Cedar Rapids. So it starts here. As a leader of the district, I feel it's really, really important that we always keep our eyes on the goal. And this is it. It's our vision. And that is every learner future ready. So if we were in an area together, I would have you do a little cheerleading with me, and I would say every learner, and you would say future ready, so that you'd make sure that you could walk away really knowing what we mean in Cedar Rapids. So it's great to have maybe what some might see as a catchphrase, but I just want to unpack this a little bit so that you know in our heart what we believe as a school district. When I say every learner, we mean each and every single child in our district, but we also see this with an adult lens, and that all of our employees, our entire community, are also learners. So it means, what can we do for everyone to make sure that they're learning? Future ready is to make sure they're ready for the next steps within their life. So a kindergartner, they're getting ready for first grade, all the way through up to our seniors, being ready for whatever path they're leading to after they graduate from high school. So when we unpack that even further, we have a mission statement. And so what we want to ensure, especially for our children, is that they have a personalized learning experience, which means it's been catered to their needs. So they have a plan, a pathway, and passion for their future. I would say in education, what's happened in particularly in Cedar Rapids Community School District, it's the idea of pathways. And there's not just one right pathway for everyone. There are multiple pathways for everyone to be successful. So for our kids, we want to help them ignite their passions, know what they absolutely love to do, and then they'll have hopefully a better idea of what they'd like to do within their future for employment. We know now, our most recent data tells us that our current graduates will change their jobs potentially up to 20 times in their lifetime, because information changes so quickly now, and so does technology. And so they may even stay in the same lane, but their job might change 20 times, and they may change entire careers. I've known several educators in the past several years who've come to education as a second career. So we want to make sure that everyone knows what they love to do, and that might lead them down different paths. So in order to accomplish that goal, we have created a strategic plan in Cedar Rapids that is focused on 4 major focus areas. And I'm going to lean in a little heavier this morning on actually our first focus area. So perhaps what was in education and what is in education is a keen understanding, or at least trying to surface a better understanding about what it means to create a really positive culture for everyone to be successful in their future. So if we really want to deliver on that promise of every learner future ready, we need to have a really good understanding of what it means to have positive, healthy culture. And so of course, that means to have a positive, healthy culture, we'll have students learning. We have to have a workforce to deliver on that promise. The most important thing in any child's life are the adults in front of them in education who help them learn. And then finally, of course, systems and resources to make it all happen. Oh, there we go. So this is that strategic plan a little further unpacked, and I'm not going to get into the details here, but I am going to pull out this thread of this statement around culture. And our purpose statement for our work around culture is to provide a safe, supportive, collaborative culture in which diversity of every learner is valued and embraced. So of course, to make that happen, we absolutely have strategies, and all these are research-based strategies, and we have measures to see if we're actually doing that. But when we put all of this work together, the entire strategic plan, how do we know that we're actually getting there? It's these system indicators. And notice the first one that's most pronounced at the bottom of the screen here is around equity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about education and the scope of our work as K-12 educators, especially in the past. Certainly for me, it's been about 10 years. Prior to coming to Cedar Rapids, I'd spent quite a bit of time at College Community School District, also known as Cedar Rapids Prairie. And equity is a focus there too. And so what do we really mean by equity? So I'll talk a little bit more about that today. We use a framework called the High Reliability Schools Framework for our school improvement work. And I just wanted to give you a look at this slide, seeing that on the foundation, kind of like building a house, at the very, very foundation of this graphic, you can see what I've already pulled out from our culture statement, and that is creating a safe, collaborative culture. And along the bookends of this graphic, you can see equity is on the one side, and then access, and I highlighted, Martha's going to be really glad that I have this highlighted, that is digital literacy is also part of those bookends. And so what we're trying to do in Cedar Rapids is to make sure that each and every child has access to what they need. And that certainly may be through a digital literacy lens, but that's also through just basic human needs lens, that they have food, that they have shelter, they have water, they have safe, healthy relationships, and that they're able to grow and develop as whole children and not just as academic students. So in order to make sure that happens, we have our focus on equity. And you may have seen this little graphic before up here, and I realize the cartoon is kind of small, but it's 3 kids watching a baseball game. And on the one side, there's equality, and they each have a wooden box that they're standing on in order to see that game. They have access to the same thing, however, not the same view of the game. And so on the other side of that little graphic, you can see equality. And this person doesn't actually even need a wooden box. This child needs a couple of boxes. And notice this one, who might be categorized more like in my height zone, as I have a friend who tells me I'm really not 5'0", I'm 4'12". But this person needs more than the other 2 to accomplish the goal. So instead of everybody getting the same thing, we start with a foundation of access, of everybody getting access to the same things, but we also realize that each child might need a little bit more in order to get to where they need to be. So through our work, we launched that strategic plan in 2016, and I'm very happy to share some data with you from January of 2020. Iowa uses a school performance profile to evaluate how schools are doing. And they primarily use the Iowa assessment to determine that, but they also have metrics around equity. And are you closing gaps between the population that's performing and has been performing really well, which is for Cedar Rapids Community School District, middle-class white children, and the gap between them and underserved populations, English language learners, our special education, as well as students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. We also have a gap between our African American students and their white counterpart students. So we have been getting after this work, and we were able to see some real celebrations in January of 2020. 24 of our 31 schools increased their numeric score on that Iowa School Performance Profile. And the categorical ratings are down here, and then you can see the score ratings are on the right column. 17 of our schools went up in their categorical rating, and 6 of those 17 went up in 2 categorical ratings. That is not easy work. It is really hard. But the reason why we were able to get there was not from all these strategies. It was having a common vision of what every learner means and what it also means to get them to be future ready. So our deep focus on equity and making sure that kids had access. In 2017, we had 7 schools that were listed as priority categories. Those were elementary schools. In 2020, we had 0. So that is a huge, huge growth for us. And I'll say this, it's not like we received a bunch of new students and a bunch of new teachers and a bunch of new leaders. We shifted our mindset and we shifted the work on equity and making sure every kid had access. So that's just Cedar Rapids, a quick story here of what we've been working on for the past several years. But of course, you also know what 2020 brought, not just good news in January, it also brought some other news in March. So as we were all experiencing this together, when the pandemic struck, I remember that weekend on the 12th, actually, all the area superintendents from the Linn County area were with Linn County Public Health for hours that weekend, and we were trying to figure out what to do next. And we knew that if our schools shut down, our hospitals actually, Tim Charles, CEO of Mercy Hospital, and I had a conversation that very same day, because they were worried about if schools closed, what that meant to their employees who wouldn't have daycare, and how we would all get through this pandemic together. And as we were waiting and wondering and kind of making some interim plans, by that evening, the governor had shut our schools down. And with obviously with safety in mind. And so that quick shift meant that we had to find out what to do next, just like we all had to do. And so the good thing for Cedar Rapids was our focus didn't change. It was still on every learner to get them what they needed. And the safe, supportive, collaborative environment continued to be our priority. And we knew that the priority had to be, let's take a step back. Learning is going to be super important here, but we have a population, 50% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. And that's 2 meals a day, not one. And we have a backpack program where we send additional food home with many, many children. So we took a step back and said, we have got to make sure that our children are fed, and we have to make sure that they have access. So that equality versus equity, we knew that our kids would need more and more and more during that time. With that, our nutrition director is incredible. So we shifted gears and we made grab and go meals our priority. So keeping the lens on safe, supportive, and collaborative environments doesn't mean at that time we said, oh, learning's not important, this doesn't matter. We knew that kids wouldn't learn, especially our most underserved populations, if they didn't have their basic human needs met. So in that course, starting from March all the way through the summertime, we served over 25,000 meals per week to kids who were 18 years old or younger. They did not have to qualify for free and reduced lunch. This was open to any child and to any child in our entire community. They did not have to be Cedar Rapids Community School District children. And so this was an incredible heavy lift, but many community members helped us with that heavy lift. And Kids on Course, if you're familiar with the Zach Johnson Foundation, they're AmeriCorps workers who usually help with the day camps in the summer. They helped make this the priority in the summer when we knew we weren't quite ready to have kids back in large settings together yet. And as all of that work was yet to go. So as I look at the future of education, the current state, I think what's happened is the lens that you all know this, is you've already highlighted how important K-12 education is to our community, certainly because we are the future. And as Whitney Houston would say, right? Our children are the future, making sure that we're preparing our economic workforce. But I also think what's happened during the pandemic is everyone's realized that our K-12 systems, pre-K through 12 systems, are really an economic spinal cord to the community for daycare, for access to healthcare, for access to nutrition needs, for access to a lot of things. And when our families can work and know that their children are safe in school and learning, I think that maybe hasn't been as realized as it's now is from this past year. So as the journey continued, we made our return to learn plans moving forward. This was another huge shift, and I'll go back to that graphic that had equity on one side and access to digital literacy on the other. We have, in 2019-20, we're able to have all of our high schools be a one-to-one environment, and that means a laptop in the hands of every student. That was not the case pre-K through 8. We had access within our buildings, perhaps 2-to-1 in some of our buildings, but certainly not access for everyone. And we knew if we had to shift to remote instruction, and we also wanted to offer remote instruction to families who wanted that, we had to scale. So back in April, our technology and digital literacy team had the insight to get on the access to supply and demand very quickly. And we ordered devices for every child, which was part of our return to learn plan. In addition to making access available for nutrition, basic human needs, as well as then learning, including technology, we've also had an increased understanding as a school district focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion from a religious point of view, from a racial point of view, from a socioeconomic point of view, from an immigrant point of view. And again, coming back to what we believe about culture, that we celebrate the diversity of everyone in our community. So as you're aware, last summer wasn't just the pandemic, there was also the murder of George Floyd, which then of course cascaded throughout our entire country. And so we also knew that we had to listen to what our community needed, and especially our children. So we did conduct what we called anti-racism town halls, virtual town halls, and did a lot of listening because we knew we were preparing our kids not just to come back from missing school for several months, but also this cultural context and political context that they were experiencing as well. So we had that going on, created a return to learn plan, got a lot of feedback from our families, and we created options for them, and we were getting feedback from them, and we were planning staffing for them. And then the derecho hit on August 10th. And the derecho, I'm going to fast forward here a little bit so you can see this. Here we go. The derecho damaged all 31 of our schools. On the pictures here, you'll see, this is Washington High School with the cars. That's Jefferson High School and the arcade. This is inside Kennedy High School. That week I hosted the governor that Friday. I kept sending picture after picture after picture to the director of education. I'm like, you guys, I know that the governor says 50% in-person instructions demanded here in August, but I'm telling you, it's not going to happen in Cedar Rapids. We need some help, lady. And the governor came over and visited us on that Friday, and we took her on tour. This is Kennedy High School. I know we got some Cougar parents here in the mix, and so Kennedy was our worst damaged school. Well, one, it just hit the wind spot right in the right place, and was just completely saturated with water. And you can see this is the Jefferson hallway. That's one hallway in Jefferson. That was all of Kennedy's hallways. It was a really a challenge to figure out how we were going to move forward. And then the tree in the middle of the classroom, that's Pierce Elementary. That's just one elementary that looked like that. So we knew that we had work to do. So when you come back to thinking about this pandemic, the social justice of the summer in the context, and then the derecho, bringing to light what's most important. I don't know if I've ever experienced a time of knowing really what it means to be humans together on this incredible planet and in this wonderful community we live in. And so we came back to what was most important. A safe, supportive, collaborative environment, not just to create for a classroom, but to create as a community. And so safety means not just that physical safety, it means emotional safety. And so from March until August, we even had employees who experienced homelessness and trauma for the first time in their life. They lost their homes because of the derecho. And we're asking them to prepare the next day to teach children. So we took a step back even further and said, we've been focused on the kids. We've got to focus on how to support our adults. So the governor gave us a waiver to delay the start of our school year. We kept our plans in place. We knew we had a great structure to improve student learning. That had already proven results for us. We had amazing construction folks to help us get our plans for our buildings. The stuff was going to come back. It was the emotional safety and the mental health for our kids and our staff members. So we created, I think this will continue to happen. And so as I think about lessons learned in the current context, many times we're just rapid fire in education. In a high school environment, first through 8th period, boom, 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 get through the day, bell to bell teaching. We've taken a breath and said, we have to make sure people have what they need from an emotional point of view and from a mental health point of view in order to really, really be there for each other. So that's been a focus, not just for our kids, but also for our staff. We implemented what we call circle time for the adults as well, which means we gather together before we get going on a day, or especially on a professional learning day. But at the beginning of the year, we did this every day. Where are you physically? Where are you mentally? And where are you spiritually? And what do you need today? And who's your go-to person who can help support you? And that's now what all of our adults are doing with our kids every day as well. So these were the options that finally, when we were able to open the doors late in September, full in-person learning, full online learning. And at our high school level, we had to have what's called a hybrid because of the sheer size of that population and social distancing. So those kids are sometimes online and sometimes in person. And of course, these were all the things that we considered when moving forward in this context. So as we thought about access and remote learning, we had 40% of our families say they wanted to keep their kids home this year and that they were not quite sure about what an in-person environment would mean. They weren't feeling safe about it. And so we made sure that we scaled not just devices, they also needed internet. So lots of hotspots, relationships with some of our local internet providers. IMON wrote for a grant. We were able to get 400 families high quality internet within their home due to that grant with IMON. And it just scaled. So now when I think about future forward, what has this done? Every teacher has had to teach online in Cedar Rapids because we had to have not just a waiver because of the derecho, but when the counts got really high from COVID cases and our county rate was so dangerous, they're right before the holiday season. It was like right after Halloween up until Thanksgiving, we got a waiver for all of our learners to be remote. And that means every teacher had to teach remotely. We had to lead remotely to plan all of this. So I think as I look forward, we've gotten some great efficiencies from having to do things via Zoom. And I think that will continue to happen. I think we might ask ourselves, does this really have to be an in-person meeting and have adults drive from across the city to come over to our district office? Or can we do this via Zoom in 45 minutes instead of an in-person meeting that might take 2 hours of somebody's time? And then at the same time, the value of human relationships, you just can't replace it. And being together, breaking bread together, we really value that too. And so making sure that we're asking better sets of questions just around meetings with adults, but also asking those questions about how we serve children. So we will continue with remote instruction probably forever. We definitely are prepared for it next year. Cedar Rapids, we applied immediately last spring in April, a year ago, to have a virtual academy for our district. So that exists, and we will continue that next year for K through 12 students, for families who want to choose that option. That is its own school now as it moves forward into next year. And so students, if they want remote instruction, will choose to be part of our virtual academy, and our teachers teach that content on the screen like this. It's and just incredible to watch them. I'll show you some pictures here in a moment. This is what we learned when I think about equity in our community and what this might mean as we move forward. When we surveyed our families a year ago, this is what we learned about internet access. And we had scaled a one-to-one environment at the high school level. And so we had hotspots for folks. Kids could take home, and it could serve up to 5 devices. So families were welcome to use those hotspots and that data as well. But as you can see, we, you look through middle school down to elementary, we had 1,000 families who needed access to the internet. This past year certainly has gotten better because of the circumstance. But if you think about internet, or just change it from internet and put in healthcare, or change it from healthcare to mental health access, or to food and nutrition access. This number was just a small sampling, I think, of the realities of the unevenness in our community. And so Hoover Elementary School, if you're familiar with Hoover, it's on the west side of town. Hoover has changed tremendously in the past 10 years. It now serves children from over 50 countries. We have over 70 languages represented at Hoover Elementary. And what our families need there is different than what families might need, say, up at Viola Gibson. And so we've been partnering more and more with community members. And I think this is the future of our community in Cedar Rapids. So I'll just tell you a quick little story here. Families at Hoover, prior even to the pandemic, we have folks coming to us from all over the world. And the parents who are so equipped, they're educated in their former countries. They had professions in their former countries. They don't speak English. And so they've come here for a better opportunity, but the language barrier has prevented some of those opportunities. And so we partnered with 2 entities, well, actually 3, Catherine McCauley Center, who provides a lot of services for our refugees and immigrants, Kirkwood Community College, and Nordstrom's. So Nordstrom's is a large employer in our community here on the Southwest side. Nordstrom's was having a hard time finding employees. And we knew that our families would be incredible workers, but they needed access. So through a partnership, Nordstrom for part of the day educates immigrants and second language English learners during their work day with Kirkwood's instructors. They get paid to learn English, and then they get trained on their jobs. And then we are the hub that provides the transportation site from Hoover Elementary and wraparound childcare for their kids. So if they're working second shift, they come to Hoover, they pick up their children, and they go home. And they're learning the same strategies that their children are learning to understand English. So I see more of that happening within our community for all sorts of populations as we move forward. Partnering with our churches, partnering with our human services in order to get families what they need. And I'll tell you, I have learned so much about the world through the lens of our families. It's incredible. Diversity is our strength. Absolutely, diversity is our strength. And it's the strength for our children to be able to understand others' cultures. And so that's, I think, as we move forward in Cedar Rapids, more and more of things will happen like that, like what we're doing at Hoover. So we stay grounded in this work. And so I'm going to take a little bit of a shift of some opportunities we've also been doing in Cedar Rapids, which is the shift in education. And that's a focus on our facility. So this is a quick update. If you are a West Sider, you could probably see some new constructions over there. Super excited about this. But Cedar Rapids hasn't had new construction over 20 years. Viola Gibson's our most recent new school prior to the current state. And what we used to build as schools is really clear classrooms, teacher in their classroom, doing their work all day. When the kids are gone, they come out, maybe chat in a break room or in the hallway, and then boom, back to your classroom tomorrow. Education has shifted from a profession of isolation to a profession of collaboration and learning and sharing with each other, even sharing kids with each other. So in order to make that happen to a greater degree, we're building facilities around that vision of collaboration. So we've got this were to be a timeline, it's like a 20 to 25 year plan. We're in the first tier of that plan, and the names of the buildings on the screen initially under a facility task force that happened 4 years ago and was adopted by the board in 2018. It was potential building sites. So we are right here in tier 1, phase 1 at a site at Coolidge and a site at the current Jackson on the west side. This also impacts Truman, who is situated right between those buildings. Truman will be repurposed. The big vision is it's really reducing inventory, but also it's creating collaborative spaces, not buildings of isolation, buildings of collaboration. So that means that we are going to look at the unevenness within our district. We have some buildings that have just over 200 children in them at the elementary level, and others that have nearly 600 of them. So if you think about the difference of delivering on resources for that, it's pretty incredible, the difference between a small building and a large building. You might have one second grade teacher in a building that has 200 kids in it versus a building that has nearly 600 kids and it has 4 second grade teachers who can share and collaborate together. So that's the vision, to go perhaps from 21 elementaries to more like 13 elementaries. There's pauses on this plan. You can see this big dotted line. That pauses this summer for us to say, okay, is this still the plan? Are these still the sites? What does our enrollment say? What's the facility say? We did not anticipate a derecho tearing through our 31 buildings. Now we've had to do some improvements, but it also gave us a better lens on what some buildings might need. So we're going to keep assessing that plan. But here you go. The Coolidge site, this was a couple months ago as it was still under construction. It's much further along than this now, but we have a new name. So board policy used to say that we had to name our buildings after presidents. Now what we're trying to do is name buildings after context. Our children submitted ideas for names for our 2 new building sites. And then we brought it to the larger community, had the community give input on that. And lo and behold, names of trees came to the surface. I wonder why that is. The current historical context. What was on the mind of our community was the derecho and rebuilding the ecosystem for our community. So the future site at Coolidge will be West Willow, and the future site at Jackson will be Maple Grove. Jackson just broke ground a couple weeks ago, and the dirt is moving over there already. So facilities built for the future means collaboration and inviting the community in, like we have done at Hooper, major community partnerships. And that means the community will have access to our buildings as well as they already have, but we're looking to deepen those partnerships. So that's it for my presentation. I know we've got about a good 15 minutes maybe left, or 10 or 15 for questions, and I will stop sharing my screen at this point in time and welcome feedback and questions that you might have for me. I'm gonna look at the chat. Do we have anything going on in the chat yet?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But there's just so many questions that you could be answering, but let me just kick it off. I wonder what you think the impact of the virtual learning and the integration of basically of the internet more and more into teaching. There's obviously a lot of positive things, but there's also a lot of potentially negative things in terms of not being able to focus. Well, I'll let you answer, but could you say a little bit more about what you think the impact is going to be of our future learners?
Yes, I think that there'll be some learning that has to happen for all. For example, the Department of Education has, with the proclamation of the governor, actually required computer science skills for all students. So not just the kids who are interested in coding should be coding, all students should be exposed to coding. And so it's another language now, and making sure that they're ready for that, because also the marketplace is looking for people with those skills. So I think that will continue to develop in regards to skill sets, but I come back to the social emotional piece. And what I said earlier, like nothing replaces human relationships. It's interesting to see how the screen has not worked very well for some of our children. They're able to get some content, but they really need still that social interaction. Especially you think about preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, how they develop those social skills together is with each other. And so in a play-based environment, so making sure that we are balancing, and that the screen doesn't replace a teacher. What it does is it provides another avenue and access. So when kids didn't have access, this is the way that they could get it. On the flip side of that, a parent came to talk to me about a couple things several weeks ago, and the story of her 3 children shows that they all needed something different. And her middle kiddo is qualifies for services with our school district for special education, has been identified and since he was a preschool age child with autism. And on the continuum, on the spectrum of autism, he has a lot of what we would call social skills goals. He also has academic goals. And what she said just spoke to my heart, and I was so happy to hear it. The areas in which he struggled the most are these barriers that he's had. He's now flourishing in the digital environment. So, because he doesn't necessarily have to worry about everyone else around him. He's so paying such attention to the screen. He now has created friendships on the screen, and his academics are off the charts, so much so that there's 2 of his goals. He had several goals within his individual education plan. He's met the goals. And so it can really work and actually be a benefit in some regards. And then in other, we have to have a balance. So it's not looking to replace humans, but rather access to humans when kids can't be there. And we have some families who are still really worried about this pandemic, and they don't want their children to be exposed, or they have a health circumstance where they are compromised as well. And so we have to continue to provide choices. So I think it'll do several things: future readiness for where it's needed within technology, within all environments and future work environments. 2, better balance, understanding when we do and when we don't put children in front of a screen. And 3, who can it really, really help and accelerate that hasn't had that opportunity before, perhaps. So the question is, how can a community like First Presbyterian support CRCSD? Well, many ways. This is something that we're learning also through the digital world. So it's been unfortunate we couldn't have a whole lot of interaction this year. We had to keep kids in cohorts, didn't have a lot of volunteers coming into our buildings. And so I think as we move forward, it's one on identifying a need, and what's the passion of a volunteer, and what's a good match within one of our school environments. So that's one way, is through our volunteer process. I don't know if any of you know Pat Simonik. She is an amazing lady who works in our district office and organizes all of our volunteer efforts. But also, I think it's maybe these conversations. What's the need that you see as a community entity? When you're, whether it be a food drive or whatever that call to action is as an organization, if there's a school up the street or schools in the neighborhood, if we can tap on each other's shoulders, we have access to a lot of people through communication means and bringing awareness together to serve the community together. So that would be ways, I think, in which we can start, as well as even sessions like this, helping folks really understand what diversity, equity, inclusion is as a community. It is our strength. And so how do we help bring everybody along that path? Do you have any idea? So yes, we will have our online options for all families next year through our virtual academy. And otherwise it's in person. So here's the assumption: we're opening the doors, we are in person for next school year. And if families don't want the in-person option, they can enroll in our virtual academy. And it's our teachers doing that instruction. So it's not just kind of a sit and get computer program. It's actually our teachers doing the instruction. And yes, there's computer curriculum as well, but that is the option for our families for next year. And that decision's been made. We're pushing, we've had a lot of advertisement for our virtual academy, but just this week is kind of like the big boom. Get ready to register, families. These are your two options. And if you want the virtual academy, can you let us know? So that's in our actually electronic newsletter this week. I would be happy to send the link to our electronic newsletter, which goes out every Friday. If you're interested, you just have to sign up and you can see what's going on every week in Cedar Rapids Community School District. Okay.
Noreen, I'd like to, I want to tell a story and then I want to ask you a question. So my story involved, I taught for a long time in rural Australia, incredibly rural Australia. The post office was over 200 miles away. So early on, and in that area, these were one teacher schools.
Yeah.
And the administration is a little different in Australia. We had a regional superintendent, roughly equivalent to the superintendent of a school district in Iowa. In one of my schools, we had 2 floods in 2 years. The first flood, the water was only about 1 foot deep in the classroom. The second flood, the water was close to 4 feet deep in the classroom. And after both of those floods, the regional superintendent didn't do much more than send a telegram saying, when are you reopening the school? Fast forward about 8 years, I was in a car accident and evacuated to a hospital. A different regional superintendent drove over 400 miles each way to see if I was okay. So my question now is, do you plan to do the same sort of teacher support after the derecho is over, after COVID is over? Are these same things going to continue?
Yes, so that is, our mindset is right there. In order for children to do well and to be well, we have to have our adults be well. And that's not just from, a fiscal point of view, that's from an emotional point of view. So we have focused a lot on self-care this year, as well as access to, I actually have a meeting this coming week. A local mental health provider reached out to me, not about support services to kids, but support services to employees. So we have a system, as most employers do, to what's called EAP. And it's an automatic access to, if you need counseling support or some additional things going on in your life, that's a free service to our employees. But that's almost, it's a nice service, but it's just right here. We have folks who've gone through so much, they need more, and absolutely they can do that on their own. But sometimes it's hard to raise your hand and say, I need help.
Yeah.
And I'll say this, so I've been on a personal journey myself this year with my health. Good Friday last year, I had received a cancer diagnosis, and here I am a year later, still plugging away and chipping away at that. I'm incredibly blessed with incredible health care. It's probably shifted my keen awareness of what everybody needs in regards to having a great support system. So it's not just from a policy point of view or access to resources point of view, it's knowing each other and giving people permission to stop for a minute within your work environment and say, are you okay? Do you need something? And having each one of our employees identify, I call it, who's your person? Is it your teammate? Is it your principal? Is it the school counselor? Is it me? I do have some employees who they reach out to me a lot. They're also on a health journey. We're kind of each other's warriors together. But yes, absolutely. And I think it's definitely it's increased awareness. But I think for us, we are forever changed by this year. The flood in 2008 forever changed some systems in our school district. But this year absolutely has changed our focus on supporting our employees. Great. Thank you for sharing your story. Hey, and thank you for saying yes to being an educator. I had a friend who taught in rural Australia and another one who taught in rural Alaska. The one in Alaska, his classroom was a plane that had crashed into the side of a mountain, and then they were able to operationalize it into a classroom years later. So, and you didn't see many people for hundreds of miles. So I appreciate your story. Thank you.
I think we're close to hitting our deadline. Maybe one more quick question, if there was any. But maybe we timed it perfectly. Thanks very much, Noreen, for joining us today. Really appreciate your presentation. And next week in this Insight class, we'll have Jennifer Bradley, who will talk about social changes and how they're impacting college education. She's the Kirkwood Academic Affairs Vice President. So look forward to that, and hopefully we'll see everybody next week at 9 o'clock. But again, thank you very much, Noreen, and really appreciate your being with us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for lifting up our kids and our community together. I greatly appreciate all of you, and hope to see you again soon sometime.
Bye all.